A young man with nothing but courage pushed a ship into the sea, toward monsters, gods, and a birthright he'd almost forgotten. But Jason didn't know that the journey ahead would become the most legendary voyage in human history, one that would reshape mythology itself. This is the story of Jason, and the quest for the Golden Fleece. Settle in now, and let the old world carry you gently forward. In the northeastern corner of ancient Greece, nestled between mountains that caught the clouds and held them like sleeping giants, there lay a kingdom called Iolcus. It was a place of olive groves and salt-tinged winds, of fishing boats returning at dusk with their catch gleaming silver in the fading light. The city sat close enough to the sea that on quiet nights, if you pressed your ear to the earth, you could hear the waves breathing in and out, slow and steady, like some great creature at rest. It was here that a boy named Jason was born. His father, Ezon, was the rightful king of Iolcus, a gentle man who loved his people and his land with equal and quiet devotion. But kingdoms are fragile things when ambition moves through the corridors of power, and Ezon's half-brother, a man named Peleus, was nothing if not ambitious. While Jason was still very young, Peleus seized the throne, and Ezon, fearing for his son's life, arranged for the child to be spirited away into the mountains, into the care of the centaur Chiron. Chiron was unlike anything the civilized world had made. He was old in the way that mountains are old, wise in the way that rivers are wise, having seen everything come and go and return again. He lived in a cave on the slopes of Mount Pelion, and there he raised the children of heroes, teaching them not with cruelty or haste but with patience, the way a stream shapes stone. He taught them to run through the forest and to be still in it, to read the stars and the weather, to understand the properties of herbs and roots, to carry themselves with both strength and gentleness. Jason grew up under the open sky of Pelion, learning the names of the constellations as though they were old friends being introduced one by one. He learned to swim in cold mountain streams, to track deer through soft earth, to tend wounds and to speak honestly. Chiron gave him everything a hero would need, and perhaps more importantly, he gave him a sense of himself that was quiet and unshaken, like a lamp burning steadily in a windless room. When Jason came of age, he knew it was time to return to Iolcus and claim what was rightfully his father's. He descended the mountain with easy, unhurried steps, wearing a leopard skin over one shoulder, carrying a pair of spears, and wearing only one sandal. The other he had lost crossing a swollen river, and there was something in that detail, that single bare foot touching the earth, that would matter more than he yet knew. There was an oracle, old as oracles always are, that had warned Peleus to beware the man who came wearing one sandal. Peleus had spent years glancing at the feet of strangers, growing old in his watchfulness, and when Jason arrived at the gates of Iolcus, the king felt something cold move through him at the sight of that bare foot in the dust. But Peleus was clever, and he did not act impulsively. Instead, he welcomed the young man, gave him wine and bread, listened to him speak with the measured calm of a man who is already planning something. When Jason declared himself and stated his intention to reclaim the kingdom, Peleus smiled the particular smile of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment. He told Jason that yes, the throne ought to be restored, but there was a matter of honor that stood in the way. The spirit of Phrixus, a prince who had died long ago in the distant land of Caucasus at the far eastern edge of the world, was unsettled, unable to find peace. He had brought with him to Caucasus the Golden Fleece, the magical skin of a divine ram, and it now hung in a sacred grove there, guarded by a serpent that never slept. If Jason were to recover the fleece, Peleus said, the kingdom would be his. It was the kind of offer that sounded generous, and was anything but. Caucasus was impossibly far away, past seas that few sailors had crossed and returned from, past clashing rocks and hostile shores and waters thick with legend. Jason accepted. Of course he did. He had been raised by Chiron to face the world with open eyes, and this is what the world was offering him now, He did not rage or hesitate. He simply began to plan. He commissioned a ship unlike any that had sailed the Greek seas before. A master craftsman named Argus was given the task of building it, and Argus worked for many weeks, choosing timber from the forests of Mount Pelion, fitting the hull together with great care, and setting into the prow a special beam of wood given by the goddess Athena herself, cut from the sacred oaks of Dodona, a beam said to have the power of speech and prophecy. When the ship was finished, it was long and sleek and beautiful, and it was named the Argo, after its maker. Now Jason needed a crew. He sent word throughout the Greek world, and the heroes came. They came the way heroes always do, willingly, eagerly, drawn by the promise of glory, and the deep human need to go somewhere extraordinary. Heracles came, the greatest of heroes, with arms like the roots of old trees and a laugh that could fill a valley. Orpheus came, the musician whose playing could charm stones and rivers and the hearts of gods. Castor and Pollux came, the twin brothers, one mortal, one divine, inseparable as two hands. Theseus was said to have come, and Atalanta, the swift huntress, who moved through the world with the quiet efficiency of a hawk. There were 50 men in all, and they called themselves the Argonauts, which is to say, the sailors of the Argo. On the morning they were to depart, the sun came up over the sea in long soft bands of gold and rose. The Argonauts dragged the ship to the water, set their oars, and looked out at the horizon. Orpheus sat at the prow and began to play his lyre, and the music drifted out over the water like mist, gentle and unhurried. The oarsmen pulled in time with the melody, and the Argo moved forward, and the journey began. The first days on the sea were good days, the kind of days you carry with you for a long time afterward. The water was calm and deep blue, the kind of blue that has no bottom to it, and the wind was cooperative, filling the great sail and letting the men rest their arms. They talked and told stories, slept in turns, listened to Orpheus play in the evenings when the stars came out one by one above them. There is something deeply peaceful about the open sea at night, when you are far enough from shore that the land is only a memory, and the stars are so numerous and so close that you feel you might reach up and touch them. The Argonauts lay on their backs and watched the sky wheel overhead, and the sea rocked them like a great and patient hand. They stopped first at the island of Lemnos, where they rested and were welcomed, and then they sailed on through the Propontis, the narrow sea that connects the great waters, rowing with steady arms through strait and channel. Along the way they encountered the Dolions, a friendly people whose king welcomed them, and gave them food and fresh water. There was a misfortune there in the night, a darkness that found them despite good intentions, but they honored the fallen and moved on, because the sea does not wait for grief to finish. On one shore they lost Heracles, not to death, but to searching. His young companion Hylas had gone to draw water from a spring and had not returned. The water nymphs of that spring, charmed by the boy's beauty, had drawn him down into their world beneath the surface, into a place that was cool and still and full of gentle, wavering light. Heracles searched the shore calling the boy's name until his voice was raw, and the Argonauts waited, but in the end the ship had to sail. Some accounts say Heracles remained there searching for a long time. Others say he found his way back to his own path eventually. The Argo sailed on without him, lighter by one great weight, and the men felt that absence the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. They passed through the challenge of the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, which were two enormous cliffs that floated at the entrance to the Black Sea, crashing together and crushing anything that tried to pass between them. The blind prophet Phineus had told them how to manage this. He had lived on a bare and wind-swept shore, tormented by creatures sent by the gods to steal his food, and the Argonauts had driven those creatures away, and in gratitude Phineus had told them the secret. "Release a dove first," he said. "Watch how she flies. If she passes through and loses only a tail feather, then row with everything you have when the rocks spring apart, and you will make it through." They released the dove. She flew straight and true, a white form against the gray stone and gray sky, and the rocks crashed behind her, and she was through, and only 2 feathers fell away. The Argonauts dipped their oars. Orpheus played faster, the rhythm quick and bright and urgent. The men pulled together with every ounce of their strength, the oars bending with the effort, and the Argo shot forward through the gap as the rocks shuddered and began to close. The stern of the ship caught the edges of the clashing stones, and the wood groaned, but the ship was through. The rocks behind them crashed together one final time, and then, as though the passage of the Argo had settled something, they were still, and they remained still from that day forward, fixed in place at last, their ancient power spent. Ahead lay the Black Sea, vast and dark and full of silence. The Argonauts breathed hard and then began to laugh, the way people laugh when the thing they feared is past, and they are still alive and whole and together. Orpheus played something light and sweet, and the laughter settled into smiles, and the smiles settled into the steady breathing of men at the oars, moving forward into unfamiliar water. The Black Sea was strange and beautiful. The shores were sometimes densely forested, the trees running right down to the water's edge, their roots tangled in the wet rocks. Sometimes the land was open and grassy and enormous, stretching back to distant mountains whose peaks were hidden in cloud. The Argonauts stopped where they needed to stop, dealt with what needed to be dealt with, and kept moving. There is a quality to a long journey, after the initial excitement has settled, that is almost meditative. The rhythm of the oars, the sound of water against the hull, the slow passage of the shoreline, these things become a kind of prayer, a repetition that empties the mind of clutter and leaves something cleaner behind. At last, after many weeks at sea, they saw it. The land of Colchis, at the far eastern end of the Black Sea, where the mountains rise steeply, and the rivers run cold and fast, and the forests are so thick and old they seem to belong to some earlier age of the world. The Argonauts brought the Argo into a sheltered river mouth and sat for a moment in the quiet, looking at the green walls of forest on either side, listening to the birds and the water. Colchis was ruled by a king named Aetes, who was the son of Helios, the sun god himself, and there was something of the sun in him, something brilliant and consuming, a power that did not easily bend. He was not pleased to see these strangers arriving in his land to ask for the most sacred object in his kingdom. He received them in his palace, which was set among gardens of rare and luminous beauty, where fountains played and strange flowers opened in the shade. He listened to Jason with the careful stillness of a man who is thinking several moves ahead. He did not say no. Instead he said yes, but he would give Jason the Golden Fleece, he said, if Jason could accomplish a task. The task was this: he must yoke 2 great bronze-hoofed bulls, who breathe fire, plow a field with them, and then sow the field with the teeth of a dragon, from which armed men would spring up from the earth. Jason must defeat these armed men and survive the day. It was the kind of task that is designed not to be completed. Aetes expected Jason to walk away, or to try and fail, and either outcome suited him. But Aetes had a daughter. Her name was Medea, and she was a priestess of the goddess Hecate, deeply skilled in magic, a woman of extraordinary perception and inner power. She had seen Jason arrive. She had watched him stand before her father and accept the terms without flinching, and something in her was moved by him, some deep part of her that had never been moved before. The goddess Aphrodite, it is said, had a hand in this, but the heart makes its own decisions too, and Medea's heart had decided. She went to Jason in secret. She met him by the great temple of Hecate, where the night was warm and full of the sound of crickets and the distant river. She told him what she knew, how to withstand the fire of the bulls, how to manage the earth-born warriors, how to approach the serpent that guarded the fleece. In exchange she asked only that he take her with him when he left, that he carry her away from this place and make her his wife. Jason swore it by the gods, and by the stars above them, which were clear and very bright that night, and Medea believed him. She gave him an ointment made from a flower that had sprung from the blood of Prometheus, a flower of tremendous power that could make a man proof against fire and iron for a single day. She told him the words to speak and the things to do, and then she returned to the palace before the sun rose, moving quietly through the dark gardens with the purposeful calm of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. The next morning the field was prepared, and the people of Caucasus gathered to watch. The bulls were released, and they were terrible things to see, bronze-hoofed, their breath coming in great hot gouts of flame, their eyes full of rage. Jason walked toward them steadily. The ointment Medea had given him held, and the fire washed over him and left him untouched. He took the bulls by their horns, one after the other, and they felt his grip, and something in them recognized a force they could not overcome. He yoked them to the plow and drove them back and forth across the field with a calm authority that silenced the watching crowd. Then he sowed the dragon's teeth. They fell into the dark earth, and almost immediately the ground began to heave and shift, and up through the soil came warriors, bronze-helmeted, fully armed, their faces expressionless as the earth they had come from. Jason remembered what Medea had told him. He took a stone and threw it among them, and the warriors, confused and aggressive, turned on each other, unable to identify the source of the attack. They fought among themselves, and one by one they fell, and the field was quiet again, the last of them sinking back into the earth they had come from. Each was silent for a long moment. Then he left without speaking, and everyone in Caucasus knew that the king was not finished. That night, Medea moved quietly and quickly. She went to the sacred grove where the Golden Fleece hung, guarded by the great serpent that had never, in all of living memory, closed its eyes. The serpent was coiled among the roots of the oak tree, enormous and ancient, its scales the color of old bronze, its breathing slow and even. Medea sang to it, soft words in the language of Hecate, and she sprinkled it with a potion, and the serpent's head slowly lowered until it rested on the ground, and its breathing deepened, and for the first time in centuries its eyes closed. Jason took the fleece from the tree. It was heavy with gold, and it shone even in the dark of the grove, a warm and steady light that seemed to come from inside it, as though it held within its fiber some memory of the divine ram that had worn it. He folded it over his arm, and walked back to the river where the Argo waited, and Medea walked beside him. They pushed off from the shore before dawn. The oarsmen pulled hard and quietly, the sound of the blades moving through the water barely louder than the river itself. Orpheus played something very soft, almost too quiet to hear, just enough music to steady the rhythm. The Argo moved out into the Black Sea, and behind them the lights of Caucasus grew smaller, and then they were gone, swallowed by the dark and the distance. The journey home was long and winding, and full of its own adventures. The gods debated and disagreed, as gods do, and the ship was blown off course more than once. They passed through unfamiliar waters, past islands and shores that no Greek sailor had seen before. They crossed a great river, and were carried through channels that no one could have planned for, as though the world were reshaping itself around their passage. There were moments of wonder and moments of weariness, and through all of it the Argonauts stayed together, pulling their oars, trusting Orpheus's music and the prow's prophetic beam and the quiet competence of each other. They passed by the island of the Sirens, those creatures whose singing had lured countless sailors to their deaths on the rocks. But Orpheus, knowing what was coming, played his lyre with such power and beauty that his music simply overwhelmed the Sirens' song. The Argonauts heard the lyre, and not the creatures, and the ship sailed past without incident. One man alone leaped toward the sound, but he was caught and held, and he recovered himself, and no one was lost. They passed by Scylla and Charybdis, the twin terrors of the narrow strait, the monster and the whirlpool. The sea goddess Thetis and her sisters guided the Argo through, their hands on the hull keeping it steady, steering it through passages that no ship should have been able to navigate. The Argonauts watched their hands on the oars and rowed, and did not look too hard at the things moving in the water around them. And at last, after months on the sea, the Argo rounded the familiar headlands of Greece. The smell of the land came to them, that particular smell of dry grass and thyme and stone that belongs to that coast, and the men breathed it in with something close to reverence. They had been away so long that ordinary things had become extraordinary. The smell of earth, the sight of olive trees on a hillside, the sound of a goat bell somewhere in the distance. They brought the Argo home, and Jason came ashore with the Golden Fleece over his arm, and it caught the morning light and glowed. The people came down to the shore to see, and they were quiet for a moment, looking at this thing that had seemed impossible, and was now simply here, folded over a young man's arm, warm in the sunlight. The quest was complete. The world had been crossed and crossed again, and the crew of the Argo had come back to it carrying something extraordinary. What came after is another story, and it is not always a gentle one, because the world has a way of continuing past its best moments, and the lives of heroes do not end neatly at the point of triumph. But tonight we leave Jason and his Argonauts here, on the shore of Iolcus, in the morning light, whole and together, with the sea behind them, and the land before them, and the long, extraordinary voyage settling into memory like a stone settling into still water, sending out its last slow rings before the surface is quiet again. There is something about this old story that touches something very deep. The idea of a group of people setting out across an unknown world together, trusting each other, finding their way through impossible things, and coming home. The sea in these stories is never just water. It is the space of transformation, the place where you go when ordinary life cannot offer what you need. And the return is never quite to the same shore you left from, because you are no longer quite the same person who departed. Let that thought rest with you now. The open sea, the sound of the oar in the water, Orpheus playing softly at the prow, the stars overhead, steady and familiar, the Argo moving through the dark towards something golden, something worth the seeking. You can let your eyes close now, if they haven't already. Let the images of this old world drift through you gently, the mountains and the sea and the sacred grove and the fleece glowing in the dark. Let your breathing slow a little more. Let the story settle around you like something warm and familiar. Thank you for spending this time here tonight. Rest well, and whenever you are ready, we will have another story waiting for you. Travel safely through your dreams.